right, hopefully you can see this. We are on track. This is the week of the 15th, so I'm going to go over Chapter 6 right now, Chapter 7 on Thursday, next week 8 and 9, the following week 10 and 11. Then you'll have another assignment like you did before, and you'll have a week worth of lab there on the 6th. Then I'm going to go over these three chapters, or these, I'm sorry, 6 chapters, and then that chapter. But we may not even, I'm not giving any homework on these, so we may even go through them faster now. We'll see. But I want to spend some time on this, which is chapter 24, which is an introduction to Model View Controller. And then we're going to do a project as a class. I'm going to get you to a certain point, and then I'm going to ask you to try to finish it. All right, so you can put your own personal touch on it. Okay, so we are kind of up to date. All right, as far as I can tell at least. So this next section today, we're going to go over how to use the standard server controls. We can go over this in an hour because a lot of it is, this is why you use a label. Remember that the author of this book is assuming that you have no experience building C# applications. All right, and other than one or two of you in here, that's not the case. All right, so Thursday we'll go over the validation controls in more detail. Chapter 8 a week from today, state, cookies, and URL encoding. A week from Thursday, master pages. Then 2 weeks from today, themes. 2 weeks from Thursday will be the site navigation and routing. The next section, 12 through 17, is all on databases. All right, so we are here at the beginning of section 2 under ASP.NET Essentials. All right, so as it says, the first 6 chapters just gave you kind of an overview of everything of the first 5 chapters. So chapter 6, again, server controls. Chapter 7, validation controls. Chapter 8, cookies, state, etc. And 9, 10, and 11 are that they're actually new because we've talked about some of the other stuff before that. But 9, as it says, are master pages. And again, all a master page is it's creating a template from which you can create other pages. So we'll spend some time on that. Chapter 10 are themes. We looked at that a little bit earlier on in the semester, and we'll come back to it. 11, you'll see how easy it is to build a sitemap for what we're working on. Really and truly is not hard. Plus, what that does is when you build the sitemaps in here, you totally use XML. So if you've done little to no work with XML, you'll have a chance to do some. All right. So again, chapter 6, as mentioned here, the standard server controls. So like I said, I don't feel the need over going over what is a label, what is a text box, what is a checkbox, and a radio button. We'll concentrate rather on just the stuff that either is new or just to kind of go back over some of the methods and stuff that you'll have to worry about. But when you look at this, how to set focus, how to set default button, how to set tab order, how to set access keys, we have looked at that already last semester. All right, if you say, well, I had Denny for the class and he didn't look at it with me, well, then shame on him, because he really and truly should have. All right. Then towards the end of the chapter, the last 10 pages or so, they talk about the checkout page that uses the server controls. So what they have you build at the end is this. All right. And you'll see when you look at it, they don't have legends, etc. All right. And it's not breaking down into like little frame type of things. It's just one big thing. Notice they have set up more of the validation controls. So for instance, that the state isn't chosen. All right, and we'll take a look at that when we get to that point in just a couple minutes. So from the top, as soon as I can find where the beginning of it is, good. All right, so an introduction to server and the standard controls. They mention on page 193 the ones that you'll use the most. All right. The thing to realize, and I want to make sure you do get this, let's suppose for a second that you build an ASP.NET and every single thing you put in it. We talked before how you probably labels that don't change, you could make those HTML controls. But let's just pretend that you didn't hear that. So every single control that you put in there is an ASP.NET control. When you run the program, all of those controls have to eventually be rendered as HTML controls. So even if it is an ASP.NET control, if you want it to show in HTML, it better render back as an HTML control, and they mentioned that in here. Now, remember this, and again, if you had Denny, I don't know if he talked with you about this or not. I mentioned this before. I said, as long as you're consistent, I don't care if you preface your labels with LBL. So if you've got a first name, you can either call it LBL first name, all right, where it'd be a little LBL, capital F, little IRST, capital N, little AME, or you can call it label first name, either one. All right, this is more the old school way, and the other way I just mentioned to you is more the new school. But again, as long as you're consistent with it, I don't really care how you do it. All right, some more of these. So again, when to use HTML elements instead of server controls. Basically, it's when you've got something that's static that will not change. So if I've got labels, because those are the ones that typically don't change, that's going to always say first name. All right, then there's no sense really in making it an ASP.NET label. And if you say, well, why? Because it does take a little while to go and render and convert things basically from the ASP.NET to their HTML equivalent. So the program will take a little bit longer to run. These are such small programs that it might be a matter of a fraction of a second, but it's going to take longer. How to use C# to work with the data in the server controls. Well, that kind of stuff look familiar. All right. This basically, when you look at it right here, on click equal button cancel click. All right, that's basically saying that when I've got a cancel button and I double click on it, that's going to set that up for me. All right, this right here looks very JavaScript-ish, to be honest with you. And you know already that if you create a button and you double click on it, it's going to bring that up. The click event for the button by default. All right. So what is this saying? Well, you should also know by now what that means. All right, it's cancel, so it's going to remove everything that's in your cart, and it'll automatically redirect you back to the order page. Oh, I didn't mean to order any of that stuff. I put the wrong whatever in. Okay. Load event handlers. We've looked at this kind of stuff before. All right, we're going to get more into this stuff as we're going on. This is basically, you've got a class called customer, and you're filling up the individual components based off of what somebody has put in text boxes. And as they say, you can code event handlers for just about anything. When you double click on any control, you get the default event handler. So for a button, it's a click event. All right, for the text box, it's a changed event. For a radio button or a checkbox, it's the checked event. Okay, type of thing. All right, how to set the focus, how to set a default button, the tab order, and the access keys. Again, all this stuff that's in here should make sense. So in a form, you can say default focus equals. I don't know if autofocus will work or not because that's an HTML5 control. That actually should work also. All right. The button, again, we're setting the default. Remember, hopefully I showed you how to do that, you know, back in the days when we were working in here. So if you're in here and you've got, what? I think the checkout would probably work, but we'll find out. All right, so we're in design mode here. What I can do is I can click on the form. I can click on the form, and as I work my way down, come on. There. There's the default button. So you can set it right there. Remember default and cancel? The default button is if you just hit the enter key, and the cancel button is if you hit the escape key. So you can set them here, or as the author shows, whoops, don't do that yet. As the author shows, you can literally set it over here when you're in your ASPX file. You're doing the same thing. There really is no difference. Again, some people are comfortable setting up everything they can in here so you're in the source mode, and other people are more comfortable in the design mode. It doesn't really matter. right, you can set up access keys, and this is a good tie-in because we're going to start to get into access keys today in Java. All right, so what does that mean? That means if you do an Alt-E, it should bring up the email. If you do an Alt-S, it should bring up the submit. All right, so it's just, they're shortcut keys. The common server controls, again, there should be nothing in here that you don't already know. You should be using the for statement, all right, if you're creating labels to associate them with text boxes. Text box attributes, all right. What's new in there? Nothing. Again, you can make something read-only if you want to set it up like that, or you can set it to enable this. You can set the enabled equal to false. All right. Max length is how many characters you can actually type in. The text is literally that. It's the text. Rows and columns by default, when you create a regular text box, are set to 0, meaning that it's just a single one. But when you work for things like, basically text areas, all right, you can set rows and columns if you do want to set the equivalent of a text area. These are all of the built-in HTML5 controls, and I'm asking you this because, again, I need to know this kind of stuff. I'm not ripping on her, but I'm asking you to be honest. When you went over the HTML5 stuff, did Arinda go over with you setting the type to email or setting the type to tell or setting the type to number? You didn't. I'm seeing a no. Is that correct? Because with all those, what that does is when you set the type equal to email, what that'll do is it'll literally change your keyboard, especially on a mobile device, a little bit. All right, it'll have the @ key in there, etc., and it'll have the numbers in there and the letters in there. If you set it to URL, all right, it'll have like a .com or something like that in there. If you set it to tell, it'll automatically do formatting for you, all right, so that to make sure that the telephone number you put in is indeed valid. Number is just that. Typically with number you stick in a minimum and a maximum. I'm working on this right now with the first year people where we're doing that Joe's Pizza site that I had you guys work with last year, and we set it up first as just a number field, but we didn't give it a min or a max. And you could put in negative numbers. Well, having a negative number of people at your place doesn't make sense. And you could keep hitting the max, or you could have hundreds of people in there. So we've set the minimum to 2 and the maximum to 12. All right. You can use ranges in here. Okay. For instance, for an age, it work a lot like with min and max, but you might have a valid age being between 1 and maybe 120. When you work with date time controls, by default you get both the date and the time. But what it'll do is it'll literally bring up a calendar control for you. So you can pick out a date, and once you picked out the date, you can tab over and set the time. Again, for the Joe's one, we're using that in there so that you can set it up. And there's where a range might make a lot of sense, because I'm not going to book something for a date that's already passed. So I might say that you need, for example, at least a week ahead of time for booking. So I might check the current date, add 7 days to that, and say anywhere from there on out. Time is just the time. Search will literally bring up a search box for you, and color will bring up a very crude looking little color wheel. All right. And notice to use those, as it says, you say text mode, all right, equal email, or whatever it is that happens to be that you're working with. And again, they mention here that HTML5 is semantic. It's not just semantic reasons. You should do it because it makes sense. You're sending that message to the browser that this is the kind of value I'm expecting. Again, as we've talked about in other classes, the amount of support is going to be limited. You're going to find that if you use Google Chrome, you'll probably get the best support. If you use Firefox, the next best, and then it goes down to IE. For checkboxes and radio buttons, all right, notice again that if you say checked by default for any one of these, it'll automatically have a check in it. You almost always don't use checks, almost always never use checks for checkboxes, but you almost always do for radio buttons. Again, you don't have to do that. but if you wanted a default gender, or in this case, a default contact mechanism type of thing. And remember, there's, as far as how you put this, it makes the most sense to put the things that are going to be selected the most often first. So if you think that you're going to have more people contacting you via Facebook than Twitter, you should flip those two. All right. So there's the code for them, and again, you can see, again, as always, as mentioned there, you typically will set some kind of a group name up when you're working with these things. We'll get into that in just a little bit more because it's done a little differently here. There's where you can check to see if something is checked. All right. But it's very similar to stuff that we've done already in other languages. I mean, this is C#. So if you had me for the C# class last semester, all right, you should be doing, that's the way it should be done. And this is what I'm telling you, just so you guys know. And granted, I'm just mentioning this. Yeah, it's being taped. But this is not a rip on Denny. This is not a rip on Arinda. But they don't have the experience that I have with that stuff. So there's things that they could mention that would make it a lot easier for me when I'm teaching the advanced class. That's why I ask those questions. I'd rather take even 2 or 3 minutes to go over something than having you say, geez, I never saw that before, type of thing. All right, with the image and the hyperlink controls, remember with the image, there's a simple hyperlink right there. All right, but the hyperlink, there are image link too. So if you want to, you can set these up, and it's going to be, I guess it's in the upload, but let me go up a little bit so you see it. All right, just the same, bless you, the same kind of way over here. When you create buttons, you can do the same thing with links. You can make links clickable. All right, at least you should know by now. Hopefully she taught you about how to make links clickable. It's just for the source. All right, you basically just stick an href in there. Or not the source, but you just surround the whole thing basically inside of an anchor tag. All right. You should know already the common image attributes. And one that's not shown in here that really is kind of important is there's also most controls that you use, just so you know this, most controls that you use also have a tag that's called title. All right, and the reason that you use a title tag is, yeah, that's your alt text, but a lot of times with the alternate text that's in there, it's not very big. You just put something little. So for instance, with this Joe's Pizza site, a lot of times with the alt text, we're just putting something in there like pepperoni pizza. Which is not all that descriptive to somebody who is sight impaired or is blind, period. So when you use the title tag, it's designed to put something bigger in there. So if the user is using some kind of a device, that reads for you, you can get a better explanation. And I just gave this lecture this morning to the class. I did it before class. I'm just taped it. But it's what you put in there is going to vary. Because if I've been blind my entire life and you're explaining something, it doesn't probably have much meaning to me. But if I've been blind recently, or maybe I was sighted for part of my life and am blind now, and you explain something, I can get a lot better mental image of it. So again, it's the navigate URL, so when you click it, where do you want to go to? The file upload, again, this is all stuff that you should have talked about last semester. So when you do put in a file upload, it'll bring this up, and there's a browse button. You can also use what's called a filter with this. And if you use a filter, for example, I might want to browse, and I'm only looking for images. So I might have a filter that only allows GIFs and JPEGs and PNGs and bitmaps or something like that, for example, and ferrets out everything else. If this is going to be a simple text file, I might want to ferret it out so that when I browse, I only get text files. All right, that kind of thing. Button controls, again, these are the 3 different ones. So you can use a regular button, you can use a link button, and you can use an image button control. They all basically work the same. They all have the same stuff associated with them. All right. And it's, to some people that would make a lot of sense. To other people, it might not. All right. Some people that just love hyperlinks up the wazoo, and they'd rather use hyperlinks than buttons. Sometimes what you'll do is you'll provide both, but just watch it because it can get really confusing to have, if you use all 3 of these, for example. I'm going to just say be consistent. Notice causes validation. If true, page validation occurs when the button is clicked. Well, that's true by default. So about the only time you'd probably set that to false would be as, you know, if you're testing or something like that, and maybe you've tested it already, and you just don't want those messages to appear. All right. Notice this, because we're going to get into this in just a couple minutes. These two things here, the command name and the command argument. The command name is the object that gets passed to the command event when you click the button. The command argument is the object that's passed. So why am I even telling you that? Well, if we go back and we look in here, I'm going to just jump up to some code for a second. So this is the end of the chapter. All right. So why am I telling you this? Remember this object center and event args? That's what they're talking about in there. Sometimes you may want to pass things in. Typically you won't want to pass in the sender object, but for the event arguments, if you're doing something where you're working with a game, maybe that every time you click, you want to pass the X and Y coordinates or something like that. You can pass those in as event arguments. So they're not used that often, but depending on what you're using this in conjunction with, you might have a reason to use the sender and or to use the arguments. So going along with that then, again, notice what's next. The command event. All right. So as it says here, and this is what, page 208, I should be following along in my own book here. Sometimes I put notes in here. But it says the two properties of the command event args are shown in this figure. Oops. And they are command name and command argument. All right. Also, when you do this, why is this important? This is a really good example in here of why using something like this is important. Notice literally we have 4 buttons here. All 4 buttons, okay, have different IDs, but all 4 buttons have the same command name. What does that mean? That means you want to use the same code to handle all of them. Now, one thing I didn't mention to you guys last semester in the C# class, and my guess is Denny probably didn't if you had him, but it is possible that we create ourselves a simple C# app like last semester. And you've got a clear button, and you've got a calculate button and a clear button, let's say, and an exit. So 3 buttons. All right. What you can actually do, what I always did was just showed you 3 different buttons. You click on each one, you put your own code in there, which is fine. But what you can do is you can create those buttons, for example, as an array. And if you create them as an array, you can have one routine that handles all of them. The advantage of that is the fact that the code is in one area. The disadvantage is that the code is in one area. And sometimes it makes a lot more sense to have them separated. That's why I've been showing it like that. But sometimes you'll find out that people do it that way. All right, and a way to force that, again, is to put the same command name in there, all right, or the same on command, I should say, for each one of those. So navigate buttons command. All right, so then you need to put in something like this. It needs to know the actual command name. So was it the first button you clicked, the next button, the previous, the next, or the last? This is very similar to some of the stuff that we looked at in Java. All right, and we'll look at more when we get into more of the GUI stuff. But it makes sense here that since all these are basically intertwined with one another, it makes sense to handle them in one routine. List controls for drop downs and list boxes, you know the stuff works basically the same. All right. You know some of the stuff that's in here. Selection mode, it defaults to single, but you can set it to multiple. Be real leery with that because, for instance, if you had a field, a drop down list with something like shipping method, you wouldn't want to allow multiple. It wouldn't make sense that I want to ship it both first class and business class, for example. It's not that you can't do that, but sometimes it just doesn't make sense to do it. All right. Rows, how many rows do you want to show in the list box at the same time? You know, for a drop down by default, it just shows 1. For a list box, it'll try to show as many as you have. But if you've got a list box, if you've got tons of selections, a list box probably isn't the one anyway. But if you've got 5 different selections and you're going to use a list box, you might want to set rows to 5 so they all show. Text, as it says, the value displayed for it. Value is the value. and selected whether or not the item is selected. And I think I showed you this before, I believe I did, but for instance, if I'm filling this up right here, all right, then, and I'm using an ID to do it, but if I click here and I choose edit items as an example, I can fill in stuff from right here. And that'll work just fine. And again, by now you should all know that text and value, the difference between these. Again, that's something I did talk to people about last semester. I don't know if Denny did or not. But the text is literally what shows in the drop-down. The value is typically what you're going to send to like a database. So for instance, you know, the classic example, if I'm using state, I might want Wisconsin to show there under a state, but WI might be the value that I want to send to a database type of thing. And also, if I don't want to do it there, I can go down to here, and if I've clicked on this, I can go down to items collection and click the ellipsis, and it brings up the same thing. Now, I would never, ever, ever do that if I'm filling this up via, like we are right now, using a data source control. You don't want to mix stuff, so I don't want some stuff I put in and some stuff out of a database, because that's just going to wreak all sorts of havoc. All right. As far as the properties for working with list controls, again, this is stuff we talked about last semester, but it pays to spend a second or two talking about it again. Why? Just, you know, repetition's a good thing, and I'm expecting that you know it. Selected item, notice the list item object for the selected item. So in other words, it'll have the index. That's what it is. If it's blank, it's going to return -1. If it's the first item that's in there, it'll be 0, etc. On the other hand, if I choose selected value, that's going to be the actual value that's associated with it. All right. The members for the list box collection, again, add. Add automatically adds it to the end. Add, you can put it in a position if you want to also. All right, with the insert. Okay, you can remove a single item. You can remove all items by using, I guess you could put them all in there, but you typically would use clear. This is all stuff that have been discussed before. So it would be the name of your list control, dot items, dot, and then one of these. And they show, this is the one that we did back in the future value day. And remember, since that was plus equal 50, that did the 50, 100, 150, 200, all the way up to 500. All right. Checkboxes and radio buttons, typically as shown here, they're almost always shown together because they are so similar to one another. All right, so again, that shouldn't be anything that's new. All right. So when we go and look at that, notice in here there are some things that you can put in as far as the layout, the way you want it to repeat. Do you want it to go side to side, up and down, etc.? And even if you don't want to use that, the direction, etc., you can still do all the stuff manually if you want to with break tags and the like. This is just a little nicety that's put in there. So notice, for example, right here, earlier when we showed the Twitter and the Facebook, they were side by side. Now they're one after the other. All right, that's just with the direction that you put in. Do you want horizontal or you want vertical? So that gets us to some actual code on page 218, and this is about the last 10 pages. So we will finish this by the break, but it's important that you look at the stuff that's in here and have at least somewhat of an understanding of what's going on in here. So again, this is a checkout page, as they mentioned, that's going to be used for that Halloween Superstore shopping cart app. In the past, when we looked at it and you click that, it would come up and say this feature has not yet been implemented. They're implementing it now. All right. And it's actually going to be a two-pronged type of approach. And what I mean by that is if I run this, so let's say I go to the order page here, and I think that's probably set to start page, but I don't remember if it's in this one or the next chapter, but I think it's here, and that's why I wanted to show you this. So you'll notice once it comes up, I'll just grab an item. I think, what is it, Austin Powers that comes up first. So we'll just grab one of his, throw it in the cart, and then go to checkout. And so you can see it, I am doing the old Corba stuff in there. So, all right. So I come in here, I have one Austin Powers thing, and I'll add it to the cart. Okay, now I want to check out. So now it's coming in, it's showing us this. You'll notice if I click checkout, all my validators are in there. Everybody can see that. All right. So I've come in there. I can put in there my information, re-entry, address, and you'll notice they're all going away when I put this in. Okay, and now we come into the new stuff. All right, please let me know about, well, notice by default it shows you this, so I can choose them all if I want to. I can choose any combination, or I can choose none of them. Please contact me via, again, not that it's a big thing, I would have probably put email first, then I probably would have put Facebook second, then text, or maybe text second, and Twitter last. All right. You know, and you say, no, I use Twitter all the time. I think that that's not an anomaly. Some people do. And it's interesting with my kids, because I got 3 kids, 24, 23, and 18. The 24-year-old tweets all the time. The 23-year-old reads tweets, but never tweets. And the 18-year-old could care less, so it just depends. But all of them use email. All right. So now when I go to check out, all right, you'll notice in here there's not, you know, data in session state, but the point is this. When I'm on here, I'm on my checkout page. When I click the button, the idea is where I'm going to is another checkout page. All right, and you'll see that in just a bit, or else it's in chapter 7. I think it might be 7 or 8 to actually implement this. But what it's going to do is it's going to say, hey, you're about to check out. Is all this information correct? And they kind of summarize everything in there for you. And again, the idea is if it's not, you go back to here and you fix whatever it is. All right. So the idea is if I came through here and said, now the re-entry, they don't match. All right. But it didn't catch it there. So I've got to choose then, do I want to do some kind of a compare thing like you do with passwords here, or do I want to allow there to be 2 email addresses? All right. That's all stuff that you have to start thinking about as you're developing this kind of stuff. In the figure they mention here, you see a message that displayed for the state code because the user didn't select a state. So they filled in everything else, but nothing there. Again, we've talked about this before. If you default it, then I think it's Alabama that comes up first. That's never an issue. Some places don't like to do that because then, since there's nothing there, if the person doesn't see to enter it, they don't, you know, they just, okay, it's Alabama. Okay. There's all sorts of ways that you can check for that. We've talked about some of those in other classes. For instance, if I'm given a city and a zip code, I should be able to ascertain the state from it. All right. Typically, if I get the zip code, I can do the state, the city, and the state. There are exceptions to that kind of stuff, but usually that's the case. That's why, again, a lot of times when a telemarketer calls you up, they ask you for your zip code. You give it to them. If I give my zip code, which is 61072, they go, oh, Rockton, Illinois. They're supposed to verify that. All right. So the first thing they show here is the associated ASPX code on this. All right, and that's on page 221 in the book. Now, what they're doing here is they're showing you all the stuff that's new. The default focus, the default button, the text mode, all right, etc. And the fact that they're using, again, a data source. All right, selected is equal to true here for this one. All right, the max length is 5 for the zip code, so they're not even allowing a zip code of 5 characters, hyphen, with 4 more characters. You could do that, and they may do that in the next chapter. I don't remember. But the next chapter not only discusses validation controls, but it also talks about regular expressions and how to use those with the validation controls. The repeat horizontal, so we've talked about some of this stuff. Then there's the code behind it, which is on page, what is it, 223, sorry. So what's new? Well, this isn't new. This is saying, again, if we're not posting back, all right, we're setting up a new customer session. We're making sure to load the data into the session. We're coming in here. We're doing our validation in here. That's checking to see if the page is valid. So the only way that that will succeed is if all the stuff that we looked at here meets everything. All right. In other words, there is an email address, there is, etc., and whatever validations we put in. If any of those don't work, then is valid here will fail. Okay. Cancel we already talked about. Remove everything from the cart. Remove that customer and redirect to order. And to load the customer data in, again, what are we doing here? All right, we're copying information. In this case, we're copying information in from the database into a drop-down list or a radio button or a whatever. So we're pre-filling for a customer, which should make sense. All right. I mean, if it's at all possible to do that, if I've been registered in your database and it can bring up information and it can bring up a page on me that they pull out information from a database, and it'll give my name, address, city, state, zip, all the goodies, the way that I normally ship, maybe even my credit card information, just showing the last 4 digits, etc. I like a site like that. Now maybe you don't. Some people find that evasive, and they're saying that's too much Big Brother type of thing. I mean, the information's held in a database anyway, whether they're showing it for you or not. But if I know it's going over a secure connection and it's already filled out for me, or basically filled out for me, I'm cool with that. All right, as far as the other standard server controls, this is the last 4 pages in the chapter here. It says when and how to use the other server controls. The table at the top summarizes the standard server controls you'll be most interested in. In particular, the wizard and multi-view control allow for several steps. So if you were going to create a page where you decided that you were going to walk the user through, maybe for some reason you have a very complex type of checkout procedure, and every time they have to do it, no matter what. You could do this, first enter your name, then enter your address, then enter your city, state, zip, then enter your PayPal information, or then enter your MasterCard, whatever, Visa, etc. type of information. That would be one way of doing it. Or if you were going to be walking through something where it was more or less a tutorial, you might use a wizard type of control. All right, so we'll look at that right now along with a multi-view. All right. And they say you can get the same results by using one web form for each step. You could also use it using div elements, but again, by using jQuery, which is going to be basically written for you, you're bringing it into the age more of HTML5. That's what the authors say. So if you decide to use one of these other standard controls, you can search them on the internet. In fact, controls like Wizard and Multiview can work well for quickly prototyping an application. The other thing that you've got to do, and here's some of the other controls here, is you have to look at your audience. All right, again, I said this kind of thing to you before, and I don't say it disrespectfully, that if I'm going to be creating an app for elderly people, I want to make this as turnkey as possible. I want it to be simple. So I want to create it where I think it's really easy. Then I want to bring in somebody like my father, who's 85, and have him try it and be real honest. Many years ago here, what we did for this class, we decided to do a class project. There were 12 people in the class. And maybe I told you about this, maybe I haven't, I don't know. But we literally, at the time, if you went over to Fleet Farm and Fleet, I guess, in Janesville, if you went over there and you wanted to buy fencing, they literally had fencing samples, which wasn't considered a real good idea because little kids could, could cut themselves on them, etc. So I got asked by Brian Ziegler, who's their head of IT, would you guys like to build an app for us? And what we did was they did. All right, I was kind of the overseer, so to speak. But we built an ASP.NET app that they put started putting into kiosks. It was all touch screen type of thing, and it was really a cool project. Everybody worked on it, and I made sure that everybody who worked on it, they all had a part, and they all graded each other in addition to me grading them. They gave me regular report backs, etc. They had to meet with the people from Fleet, etc. And it worked pretty well. I don't know if they're using it here. I know that they did put it in. It was at their store in Verona that they were using it because they sent me some screenshots of the stuff. Well, the reason that I'm telling you that is when we were testing it, one of the guys who was in the class at that time, Tim Spike, he's now works for he writes SQL reports for a dairy company, I think in Clinton or Delavan. But Tim, his dad is a farmer, I think in Orfordville. We had him come in and test it all. And you talk about a person who'll be blunt honest with you. You know, he'd just look, this thing frickin' sucks. And he would just say stuff like that. Not swear words, but just stuff along those lines. And this is easy. It'd be easier if you did this. The picture should be on the other side. The text should be bigger, etc. What a great representative sample, because he was the kind of guy who was going to use it. And if you test your own stuff, whether you realize this or not, you're already prejudiced. You know, it's like for years, my mother, literally her job was, she worked for an ad agency, and one of her main jobs, she's very good at literally taking two fingers and going down a resume. She could tell any word that was spelled wrong, if you had sentences in there, if they had bad grammar or whatever. And the agency that she worked for said, you find an error, you throw it out. I don't care if they have a 4.0 average. That was the way they did things. All right, so why am I telling you that? Because when I showed her my resumes, Jeff, I don't even have to look at this. I know it's going to be fantastic. That wasn't what I wanted to hear. I wanted her to look at it as though I was somebody coming in, and that's what eventually she did. So when I make major changes, or even minor ones to my resume, I have people look at it, not necessarily who are my friends, but people I have respect for. All right, we had a woman who taught here for many years in the admin area, Jackie McDougall. Well, she was a friend, but not anyone I knew real well, but she'd scrutinize. So when I wrote my resume, I'd run it by her, because I knew that if there was something she didn't like, that she'd just rip me on it. And that was cool. I had no problem with it. All right. But most of these, calendar, ad rotator, etc., they have limited uses, or maybe they have a lot of uses depending on what it is you're trying to do. All right. But they don't really go over them very much in here, and I'm not going to either. All right. Again, you can add your own jQuery plugins, which a lot of times will replace this stuff, because the code will be written for you, and there's very little that you have to do. It's almost kind of a turnkey where you just drop it in. All right, so then they do go through how to use the wizard control in there, and they walk you through it. Okay. And I believe that's the chapter. So again, on Thursday, we're going to go in and look at the validation controls. We've already looked at this, but we're going to look at it more depth and breadth of coverage. Again, I imagine it'll take somewhere around an hour. All right, so you have the second hour now. Work on whatever, including your ASP.NET if you're still working on that. All right, that's all that I have. Questions?